Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, Mitsi Studio, who has a very unique and I think very entertaining style of presenting their videos, has a new video out about the U.S. Civil War. It came out 3 months ago, so I guess it's not that new. But I do a lot of Civil War content, so I wanted to wait a little while on this one. But I know they have such a unique style that it might be worth taking a look at. It's only a 10-minute video, but y'all know me, or if you don't know me, welcome to my channel where the U.S. Civil War is kind of the thing I know the most about. So expect me to be breaking this down a lot. And if there's even the tiniest little mistake, I'm going to be nitpicky. So just be prepared in advance for that. But I think it should be a lot of fun. I'm just really curious to see how they present this. We most recently watched one of their videos about World War II, and it was pretty interesting, especially considering a rather sensitive topic, which it covered, I think, really well. I'm going to put a link down in the description to the original content. I'm also going to pin in the comment section a playlist to all of my Mitsi Studio content that I've broken down over time. And I want to give a shout out, a huge thank you to Andrew in Kennewick, Washington, who just signed up a couple of days ago as our newest executive producer level patron. Andrew, the end screen will reflect that very soon. I'll get your name added to that. In the meantime, shout out and a huge thank you. Incredible amount of support, and you allow me to continue doing this. So let's go ahead and dive into this one.
Today we're diving into the biggest family feud in American history, the Civil War, a drama filled with slavery, heroes, and battles, with Fort Sumter being the spark that lit the powder keg. The South.
So interesting that showing Fort Sumter at the beginning. Well, I mean, I guess they've got Confederates in there at the beginning. Obviously, Fort Sumter was the fort that was fired on while it was under Union control that kind of sparked the Civil War. It was fired on. So there's a lot of background to this, and I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time just on Fort Sumter, but Robert Anderson is a major, a Union major. He's in command of all troops defending Charleston Harbor. There's several forts. He's initially based in Fort Moultrie, which is kind of land side, and really was intended to be a fort that could be vulnerable from the land because it was meant to protect the harbor and to fire on ships coming into the harbor. It wasn't really built to defend against a land invasion, and so he knew he was really pretty vulnerable from attack by South Carolina militia. So he gives his men like a half-hour warning, and in the middle of the night, they retreat to Fort Sumter, which is this fort that's in the harbor on man-made land. Charleston Harbor is very shallow in places. There's only a narrow channel in the middle that you can actually take deep ships through. So they've built this fort out on kind of one of these sandbars. And so there's attempts to resupply. There's actually some firing that happens a few months earlier, I think back in January. And then Lincoln, when he becomes president in March of 1865, decides he's going to re-provision the fort. And the fort garrison is warned that they're going to be fired upon if they don't surrender, and they refuse to. And so at 4:30 in the morning on April 12th, 1861, the first shots are fired from, I think it's called Fort Johnson, which is a battery real close to Fort Sumter under command of Beauregard. They take a couple of days of it, no casualties, nobody killed anyway. And then during the surrender ceremony, they're lowering the flag and they're firing a volley, the Union is, with some cannon to salute the flag, and there's an explosion, and there's your first death of the American Civil War.
The South wanted to split. Lincoln said, "No way, Jose," and thus began 4 years of fighting that literally tore the country apart, but ultimately set it on a new path toward freedom and equality. This is the American Civil War in a nutshell, with bombs, ideals, and a whole lot of chaos. Talking about blowing stuff up and moments that shaped history, let's give a huge shout out to our sponsor, War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game available for free on PC, consoles, and Android or iOS for mobile. Step out of the combat Stone Age and command over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations. Whether you're piloting biplanes from the roaring 1920s or charging into battle.
And honestly, my favorite thing to do is fly biplanes and do air war. We used to do streams where people could join on the gaming channel. A lot of fun.
Today's fierce fighter jets, you'll be at the front lines of epic warfare. War Thunder runs on a heavily optimized engine, so even your veteran grandpa can get in on the action. The stunning graphics and authentic sound effects make you wet your pants and put you right in the driver's seat of history's most powerful war machines. Choose your battlefield with 3 distinct modes: arcade, simulator, and realistic. Join the massive community of over 70 million players today on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile devices. Play War Thunder for free. Use the link in the pinned comment or description. Haven't played in 6 months? No problemo. New and returning PC or console players receive a huge bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. In 1861, the United States decided that
Wait. Let me go back to that map. So, blacks for sale, dusty Indian cemetery, indecisive people, and slightly less racist white folks. And that's true. I mean, you've got a lot of abolitionists. You do have people particularly in the North, that do want full equality. But your average white Northerner either doesn't care about slavery in the South, or even if they're opposed to slavery, doesn't necessarily want slavery to end and blacks, newly freed slaves, to have equality with white men. In fact, a lot of people, even those who are abolitionists, folks like Abraham Lincoln, once these enslaved people are freed, feels the only chance they have to have any kind of decent life is to send them back to Africa, send them to a place like Liberia, or send them to Central America, set them up with a place of their own, because most white people don't see blacks as ever having a chance to be seen as equals.
In 1861, the United States decided that a simple family drama was too boring and went for a full breakup. Tensions over slavery were already sky high, especially since the South had a business model that practically ran on free labor. Just like modern sports brands and phone manufacturers, you know, that sort of thing. But the North had been eyeing the South for a while, and something had to change. Abraham Lincoln took office and voiced the radical idea that people maybe shouldn't live in slavery.
Now, Abraham Lincoln did not come to the presidency with the political view that slavery should end. He may have held that view personally, but Lincoln is a very practical politician. He may be the best politician who's ever been president. He knew what was possible and what was not, and he knew how to leverage what was possible to get what he wanted. And so he and the Republican Party, their official stance was that slavery should not be extended to new territories, whereas the slave states had the opposite view, that it absolutely should be extended to territories. And this was all about balance of power. A new territory means eventually a new state, and a new state means 2 new senators. And if it's a free state, those are 2 anti-slavery senators potentially, or a slave state, 2 pro-slavery senators potentially, plus congressmen. And so it's all about that balance of power. So Lincoln comes to office opposing the expansion of slavery. He doesn't feel that he's got the political ability to end slavery, at least not until the war starts.
This was received in the South as if someone had just taken away their lollipop. South Carolina kicked off the secession and declared, you know what? Fuck y'all. We're out.
Secession. It's a common thing people get wrong. Secession versus succession. Succession is like when you're the king and you die and your child succeeds to the throne. That's succession. Secession is when you remove yourself from something.
Other southern states thought, get bent, y'all. Piss off, y'all. Y'all can shove it. Drop dead, y'all. Y'all kiss my big old southern ass. Y'all can take your shit and go. Go to hell, y'all. Y'all go piss up a rope. Eat a bag of dicks, y'all, and screw you.
This isn't the slightest bit offensive to Southerners, right?
You guys, y'all. And join the new Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president.
So when Jefferson Davis is sworn in as president, it's in Montgomery, Alabama, because Virginia is not part of the Confederacy yet. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas don't join until after the war actually begins, after Fort Sumter. Yes, they were very pro-slavery, and slavery was legal there, and Virginia is one of the largest numbers of slaves in any state. But they're enough on the fence that it's only when they see that Lincoln is going to put down the rebellion by force, and he calls for 75,000 volunteers for 3 months, which is the longest amount of time and the most number of volunteers that he is allowed to call by law. So he goes for the max until Congress passes a new law that authorizes him to call for more men for a longer period of time.
Then came Fort Sumter in April 1861. The Confederacy decided to throw the first punch by firing on the Union fort in Charleston.
So that was actually a pretty good
The Confederacy
portrayal, I think, of Fort Johnson is probably, it's in that kind of range as far as firing on the fort, and it looks pretty good for Fort Sumter. If you look at Fort Sumter today, it doesn't look like that, but that's because basically the whole second level of the fort is gone, so it's not as tall as it used to be.
Decided to throw the first punch by firing on the Union fort in Charleston, officially starting the war. The North, the Union, and the South, the Confederacy, were now officially in conflict, and both sides built large armies to prove their point. The North had more people, more railroads, and more factories, while the South relied more heavily on courage and some brilliant generals like Robert E. Lee. Lee, who had originally wanted to fight for the Union, but felt compelled to defend his home state of Virginia.
There were a lot of Confederate generals who were of that mindset that if their particular state had stayed loyal to the Union, they would have stayed with their state. They viewed their state as their country. They viewed their state as their home. And I can't necessarily argue with that logic. But they didn't all do that. I mean, you have Southern generals who did not stay loyal to their state and stayed loyal to the government instead. Great example, George Thomas, who was a Virginian. You have John Gibbon, who is a North Carolinian. Yes, he was born in Pennsylvania, but he lived in North Carolina for a long time before the war, and his brothers all fought for the Confederacy in North Carolina units.
He opposed slavery from a philosophical perspective, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yet he supported its legality and
owned a whole
held
lot of
hundreds of slaves. Meanwhile, the Northern economy was proving its industrial might. The South was mostly dependent on agriculture and struggled to acquire war supplies.
And this goes all the way back to guys like Thomas Jefferson, who believed that this was the right way to be, that an agrarian society was the preferred society, and that, big cities and big banks, and that these were corrupt things and that these were bad for society, and so it was more than just about slavery versus not slavery. This was a deeply ingrained difference of culture in terms of what societies should even look like,
increasing their logistical pressure and reliance on overseas trade with countries like Great Britain. The first major battle took place at Bull Run. The Union had an unpleasant surprise here. Their soldiers thought the Southern Army would be easy to defeat, but they were quickly beaten themselves.
Now, I told you I'd probably be nitpicky. The Union's actually winning for most of this battle. And what happens is there are two, think of this as there being two Union armies and two Confederate armies. And you have two Union armies kind of facing off in the area of Washington, D.C., and then you have two more Union armies that are up further, at the head of the Shenandoah Valley, up around Harper's Ferry and Winchester in that area. And what happens is the Confederate Army, for all the talk about railroads and industry for the Union, the Confederate Army is the first one to really use railroads to its advantage. And they load up their army that's there in the Shenandoah Valley on trains, and they sneak them over to the Manassas battlefield, and they arrive in time to turn the tide. And it's that army that includes guys like Stonewall Jackson. So the Union wins. It's a feint at the bridge, and then they kind of make a flank attack around on their right, and they're actually able to overrun the Confederate Army, and eventually they get up to Henry House Hill, and that's where the Confederates are able to make a stand and rout the Union Army.
This battle was a wake-up call for the Union, who realized that the war would be much harder than they had thought. There followed many bloody battles, such as Shiloh and Antietam. The Battle of Antietam in 1862, the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, showed the determination of both sides to keep fighting, even if
That's a pretty good view of Burnside Bridge there.
Meant extreme sacrifices. Winning Antietam gave Lincoln the chance to issue the Emancipation Proclamation.
We white people educated ourselves. Slavery is not cool. Yeah, we've talked about this before, but Antietam's not really a victory in the strictest sense, but it's a strategic victory in that Robert E. Lee had invaded the North. He's only been in command of the Confederate Army for a couple of months. He invades the North. He's turned back. His army should have been destroyed. McClellan had the manpower to just wipe Lee's army out at Antietam, and he didn't do it. But it was enough for Lincoln to be able to release the Emancipation Proclamation from a perceived angle of strength. And this is twofold. Number one, it's about changing the nature of the war to something more than just preserving the Union. And this didn't necessarily sit well with a lot of Union soldiers who had enlisted to preserve the Union, not to free the slaves. Now it's about both. And that's also sending a message to people like the British to say, hey, you don't want to intercede on behalf of a South who's now fighting to defend the institution of slavery, whereas we're fighting to destroy it. But it also allowed the Union then to treat what were called contraband, runaway slaves, as property that could be released. And these men could now be even enlisted in the army.
Proclamation, which declared all enslaved people in the southern states free. This made the war for the Union not just a fight for unity, but also a fight for moral justice.
Right. Meanwhile, though, slaves in the Union states, places like Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, states that had remained in the Union, this doesn't impact them. They're still enslaved.
First, wokies, as you will. At the same time, it discouraged European countries like Great Britain from supporting the Confederacy, giving the Union a significant strategic advantage. Another important factor was control of the Mississippi River. The Union launched an Anaconda Plan. No, I hear what you're thinking, but that wasn't it. It was a plan to surround and exhaust the South by cock-blocking.
I thought at first he was going to just spank him and show that they were spanking the Confederate Navy, but yeah, this was brilliant. The Anaconda Plan is ultimately going to be a major piece of why the Union's able to win the war. It's about economically strangling the South. It's not a lot different than how the British had economically strangled Europe when Napoleon was in command of Europe, and how the British economically strangled the Germans in World War I.
Cutting off their supply of weapons and goods. By capturing control of the Mississippi, the Union split the South in two, making it harder for southern states west of the river to connect with the eastern forces. In 1863, General Grant led the siege of Vicksburg, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi.
So technically, I mean, that's how we talk about it, right, is Vicksburg is controlled of Mississippi. It was the toughest nut to crack, but it wasn't the final piece. There's actually a little bit more that happens in the weeks afterward, a little further down the river, that has to be taken care of at Port Hudson. But that's done, and they knew that those two were the last two remaining pieces. But Vicksburg is the tough nut to crack because it's such a formidable base of operations for the Confederacy.
This was a massive blow in the nutsack to the South, and left them both economically and strategically castrated. The Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 became one of the war's most crucial battles. General Lee tried to turn the tide of the war with an invasion of the North by attacking Pennsylvania, but his troops were eventually crushed like goobers. Gettysburg became a turning point. From that moment, the South was modestly on the defensive. Lincoln seized the victory to give his famous Gettysburg Address, calling for a new birth of freedom for a nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
I had the privilege last year of sitting down with Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, who's one of the reasons I got into the Civil War in the first place. And we were talking a little bit about this, about how very much that Gettysburg is, especially because of the Gettysburg Address, that this is kind of a second, I know the South called the Civil War their second war of independence, but this is like a reset on the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence says, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the fact is that did not apply to the people who were enslaved or even to the freed blacks at this time. And so Lincoln takes this opportunity in November of '63 at the Gettysburg Address to give a reset and say, now we really do mean it. And Ken Burns and I were talking a lot about that, about how we should view it that way.
In 1864, Ulysses S. Grant, nicknamed the Butcher, became the Union's commander and adopted...
Nicknamed the Butcher by people who don't know what they're talking about, especially in the South, who were subscribing to the Lost Cause myth. Robert E. Lee lost more men than Ulysses S. Grant did during the war, and Grant was in command of armies longer than Robert E. Lee was.
A strategy of constant attacks to wear down the Confederacy. He launched the Overland Campaign, sending his armies to relentlessly engage Lee's forces. Grant's approach was simple and ruthless. The Union had more soldiers and resources, so if he just kept attacking the Confederacy, their reserves would eventually run dry. This led to bloody battles, such as the Battle of Wilderness and Spotsylvania.
Yeah, brutal stuff.
Meanwhile, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman led his famous March to the Sea in 1864. What began in Atlanta turned into a trail of...
Yeah, you didn't see too many Gatling guns on the battlefield in the American Civil War, hardly at all.
...destruction toward the Georgia coast. Sherman's army destroyed railroads, factories, and farmland to fuck over the Southern economy and break its morale.
This is the mindset of warfare in the 20th century, right? You know, look at the strategic bombing campaigns. It's not just about winning on the battlefield. It's also about destroying your enemy's ability to sustain the war, to feed and supply and weaponize its soldiers in the field. And so you go after the economy, not just the actual armies.
His scorched earth tactics left the South poor as a church mouse and was a final blow to any hopes of the Confederacy making a comeback. By 1865, the South was completely exhausted. Soldiers deserted, supplies were depleted, and the dream of a separate Southern nation quickly faded.
This doesn't get talked about enough, that by 1865, you're seeing massive... I mean, there's always been desertion on both sides, but you see massive numbers deserting the Confederate Army by 1865. These men knew that the war was over long before it ended on the battlefield.
After a long and weary chase, Lee's army was surrounded. He was forced to surrender his ass to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April the 9th, 1865.
Appomattox.
The surrender was modest and generous. Grant allowed Lee's soldiers to return home without punishment, probably because everyone was too exhausted to keep fighting.
But what you don't see, you see how he's kind of portraying the Union soldiers as kind of taunting and mocking them. There was a very intentional effort by guys like Lincoln and Grant to not let that happen. In fact, when the day that the surrender happens, Grant hears cannon fire, and it's his soldiers firing the cannon in celebration, and he orders it stopped. He said that the rebels are our countrymen again. We're not going to gloat over them. And it was a very respectful surrender in that sense.
Unfortunately, the war ended with a tragedy.
So Grant and his wife were actually supposed to go to the theater that night with Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln. And there's a couple of reasons why they didn't. One, the official reason was they wanted to go see their kids, which were in New Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Philadelphia sits right on the river, across the river from New Jersey. And the other reason, unspoken, is that Mrs. Grant just didn't want to be around Mrs. Lincoln. Mrs. Lincoln had burned a lot of bridges with generals' wives. And so Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris end up going instead. There's actually 2 doors between Booth and Lincoln at this point. He waits for one of the biggest laugh lines in this. It's something like, "I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you sock-dologizing old man trap." And everybody laughs, and that's when he fires.
Lincoln was assassinated by John I Broke a Foot Wilkes Booth,
A leg.
a Southern sympathizer, which shocked the nation. Lincoln's death made the process of Reconstruction even more difficult.
Yeah.
And showed that the fight for equality and unity was far from over. What important things did we learn from the American Civil War? Getting rid of slavery is a very pricey endeavor. Hundreds of cities were flattened and 620,000 soldiers had to kick the bucket to adopt a more inclusive business model.
Yeah, well, the South didn't get the memo on adopting the more inclusive business model afterwards. And there are some estimates now that put the death toll as high as 750 or even 800,000. It probably was more than 620,000. But a lot of people recognized this all as kind of God's judgment on the United States for hundreds of years of chattel slavery. In fact, Lincoln in his second inaugural basically said as much. He said, if this is the price that we had to pay, because of all the unrequited toil, all the hundreds of years of labor that was poured into this country on the backs of slaves without being paid for it, if that required us to pay with blood, with the sword, what was done with the lash, then God's will be done. That was basically how Lincoln put it.
Christians tried to stop the slavery thing several times before, but it was officially abolished with the 13th Amendment. So, good job there, chaps. It's something countries like Saudi Arabia, India, China, Pakistan, North Korea, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Bangladesh might learn something from, right? The Civil War brought the country one step closer towards a better future. Though the struggle for civil rights still had a long way to go.
Yeah. Indeed.
We're marching for the Union.
Let's make the world a better place and start...
All right, that was good. And I like how they kind of tied it together there a little bit with talking about how, it wasn't over. It wasn't like suddenly everybody was free and everything was great. And Andrew Johnson bears a lot of the responsibility for why that didn't happen, but so do the people in the South who just found creative ways to continue slavery, unfortunately. And Reconstruction is something that I think we should study more, and we're going to talk more about that in the near future. So let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. Check out some of the other Mitsi Studio reactions I've done in the playlist pinned in the comment section. Thanks for watching.